It's a fascinating question. Chanukah is the festival missing from the Mishnah. Why is there no tractate dedicated to Chanukah? Just like there is a Maseches Megillah, a tractate in Mishnah dedicated to the holiday of Purim with all of the laws of Purim, which is a holiday that was created by the sages and the prophets after the story of Purim. Why is there no similar tractate recording and articulating all of the laws about the holiday of Chanukah that was created during the Second Temple era by the sages of the time? What happened to Chanukah? It's mentioned in the Mishnah, but only in passing, connected to other laws completely. There's no tractate dedicated to Chanukah. There is a famous answer that some attribute even to the Chassam Sofer. That's Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the chief rabbi of Pressburg, today Bratislava in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, who lived in the early 19th century. That the editor of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, had an axe to grind. Why? You see, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the editor of the Mishnah, came from the family of the dynasty of King David. His father and his grandfather, great-grandfather, were all descendants of King David. They were all the Nesiim, the leaders of the Sanhedrin, of the Supreme Court, before the destruction of the Second Temple and after the destruction of the Second Temple. Now, the people, the leaders who came from the house of David, from the tribe of Yehuda, were very upset at the Chashmonaim. Why? The Chashmonaim were from the tribe of Levi. They were Kohanim. B'mei Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. They fought a brilliant and heroic campaign against the Syrian Greeks. They liberated the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, rededicated the Beis HaMikdash, lit the menorah. But they made a mistake. Instead of remaining priests in the temple, they also became kings over the Jewish people. Now royalty, kingship, was reserved for the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. So this answer says, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was upset at the Chashmonai behavior, and therefore he deleted Chanukah from the Mishnah. He mentions it a few times, but he didn't dedicate a tractate to Chanukah. However, this answer is very problematic for two reasons. Reason number one is, anyone who is even slightly familiar with the culture and the structure of Torah Shebaal Peh, of the oral tradition, knows the prerequisite of the entire oral tradition is two words: intellectual integrity. The moment you introduce subjective emotions, familial agendas into the conversation, the authenticity of the oral tradition is compromised. And that's why all the sages in the Mishnah and the Talmud, if you study them, you study their method, their style, their character, their conversation, their debates, their disputes, they all had one common denominator: they were committed to truth and only the truth. How can Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi neutralize a holiday that was celebrated and embraced by the Sanhedrin and created by the sages and observed every year in Jewish homes because of a personal bias? That's absurd. Number two, let's say he had a personal bias. Jews have to know how to live on Chanukah. They have to know the laws of Chanukah. Mishnayos is not a book of sentimentalities. It's not even a book of history. It's not a book in which you're judging the Chashmonaim if they were good guys or some of them later were bad guys. It's a book of laws. Jews have to know how to live. It's the holiday of Chanukah. What do I do on Chanukah? Do I say Hallel? What part of Hallel do I say? I light a menorah. Where do I light it? How do I light it? How many candles do I light? What do I do when I light it? What are the blessings? What if I forget? What time? Nothing. All these laws we only have recorded in the Gemara and Talmud hundreds of years later. The Talmud was finalized in the 5th century after the Common Era. That's hundreds of years after Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. So I'm going to share with you tonight an answer that was suggested by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who said as follows. The Talmud tells us that the oral Torah was not allowed to be written. Gittin, tractate Gittin, page 60. The oral tradition had to be communicated from teacher to student, from student to next student, in a vibrant, dynamic, lively chain of Jewish continuity. It was not supposed to be recorded. This guaranteed the vibrancy and authenticity of the Jewish tradition. And yet, when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi lived, at the end of the 2nd century after the Common Era, he saw that the Jewish people are being scattered all over the world. and this continuity will not be able to be preserved, and the entire oral tradition would be forgotten, and therefore he violated the law, and he recorded all of the traditions in the Mishnayos. This dispensation can only apply to laws that would have been forgotten. So for example, nowhere in Mishnah does it say that you have to make Kiddush Friday night. Why not? He does discuss a debate between Shammai and Hillel in Tractate Brachos, chapter 8. When you make Kiddush, which blessing of Kiddush do you make first? But he doesn't tell us the law. You have to make Kiddush. He doesn't tell us how to put on tefillin or how to put on tzitzis, even though this is all part of the oral tradition. Why not? The answer is because this was so ingrained in Jewish life and Jewish culture. It happened on a weekly or a daily basis. There was no need to write it down. It would have not been forgotten. So there was no permission to write it down. The story of Chanukah happened 200 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. The Second Temple was destroyed in 68 after the Common Era. Chanukah happened 164 before the Common Era, around 2 centuries. The story was so alive and vibrant in the Jewish mind. The celebration of Chanukah was so dear to the Jewish people. Every single year the families came together and they remembered this story that didn't happen so long ago. They heard it from their father, who heard it from his father, who heard it from his mother, who heard it from his mother, that there was no need to write it down in the Mishnah. The story of Purim happened before the Second Temple was built. It happened hundreds of years, more than 4 centuries before the destruction of the temple. It happened more than 500 years before Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore he had to write it down. It wasn't so fresh. It happened in Persia. It happened much earlier. A lot of water came under the bridge. But the story of Chanukah was so alive, it was so vibrant, it was so fresh, even though there was nobody alive to remember it. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi lived a century after the temple's destruction. The temple's destruction was 2 centuries after the story of Chanukah. The Jews felt it was their miracle. It happened close to their time. And it happened with their Beis HaMikdash, with their menorah, in the land of Israel where Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi lived. And therefore, there was no need to write it down. And therefore, there was no permission to write it down, because Chanukah remained and remains such a vibrant, glowing, warm holiday in the heart of the Jewish people. Have a happy Chanukah.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.